Hello and welcome to another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. My name is Mike Bombard and I'm a Principal Cloud Architect here at CloudBolt. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing how do I use the vCloud Director Resource Handler in CloudBolt. So a somewhat recent addition is kind of the revamp of our vCloud Director Resource Handler. This is just the agenda we're going to run through. First, we're going to show you how to initialize the vCloud Director Resource Handler. Then we're going to walk through the process to leverage your credentials to connect to that endpoint. Then we're going to go through the process to create environments for organizations and VDCs inside of CloudBolt. Then we're going to go through just kind of the configuration settings all the way from step 4 to 6, where we're importing your templates and your storage, setting up your environment settings, adding that environment to a blueprint, and then finally we'll be ordering a server, then testing day 2 actions against those servers that were deployed. So should be a pretty quick run through of one of our resource handlers. Let's go ahead and get started. One of the first things you'll notice if you're going into your CloudBolt instance, you may not see vCloud Director is here as one of the options in the UI. So the first thing that we need to do is actually run a command that will enable us to turn vCloud Director on for CloudBolt. It's kind of a hidden resource handler. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I'm going to do is launch my SSH connection. Then once I'm SSH'd into my appliance here, you can ignore the top section here. I'm just going to run this command. So it's opt CloudBolt initialize create objects.py and then opt CloudBolt initialize vCloud Director. And we should be able to run this command, let it execute. It took maybe 5 seconds to run. I paused it needlessly. But you should see this where it's loading the vCloud Director.py into the CB objects module. Let's jump back over to CloudBolt and I'm going to refresh my resource handlers page. Hopefully we see it right away. Sometimes these can take a minute to show up. There you go. So vCloud Director is now showing up inside of my CloudBolt instance. So that's step 1 is enabling the vCloud Director Resource Handler. Step 2 then would be getting credentials to this vCloud Director Resource Handler. And we'll kind of walk through that in a second, but what we're going to do is eventually put in our URL to our vCloud Director, the appropriate port, our username and password. So these are the things that we're going to need to connect to vCloud Director. And we're going to go through here in just a minute and figure out how to do that. Okay, so now that I have my credentials, I'm going to go ahead and add a resource handler. We're going to do vCloud Director. It's going to be HTTPS, my IP address or URL. I prefer URL here. I think that's best practice. I am going to use the administrator account just because that's what I have access to. And then I can store my password. I don't have SSH set up for my vCloud Director instance in CloudBolt, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. I don't need to save that. We're going to just call this vCloud Director. You could enable the console feature, which would allow servers from this resource handler to leverage the console. Let's leave that enabled for now. I'm just going to leave it named as vCloud Director. You could put, maybe you call it vCloud 10 for your environment. It's really just a label for the resource handler itself that you can use to pull that information in. The other thing that I will point out is I believe what we've done with vCloud Director is we have we've set up an account that has at the provider level that has access to be able to do things via the API in our subtenant. So that's an important thing to note. In my instance, it is the administrator account, but in your instance, you probably want to leverage a different service principal, again, that has rights to the different tenants inside of here. So let's see, administration. I just want to check this out real quick. So users, this is an administrator. The role is a system administrator. So this user should be able to view all of the subtenants and things like that, I believe. All right, so we've now connected to vCloud Director. First thing I can do is I can verify the connection here. So we can see that we're connecting to vCloud Director. Next thing we want to do, just like with any other resource handler in CloudBolt, we kind of want to work from left to right. The first thing we can do is import organizations and VDCs inside of CloudBolt. I'm probably going to do that one. Okay, so select your organization you want to import. We're going to import that organization, and then once it's created, we can go ahead and move down the line. We have an environment here. We'll come back to that. I'm actually going to launch a tab to my environment. So hold down the control button, click on the environment. We're going to go over to VApp templates. You'll notice there are no templates showing in here right now. So we're just going to go ahead and import these. Give it a second to, it looks like we just have a single template available in my environment. So we're going to import that VApp template. Storage, just see if we need anything. It looks like we're leveraging that virtual data center. I'm going to import storage policies just in case there are any additionals. Doesn't look like there is. We could set a type on the storage policy to be a new disk type. And we could create a disk type. CloudBolt has a construct considered to be disk types where you could set your own disk types. Maybe we call this gold or silver or bronze, and anytime they select that, it should correspond to the storage in this virtual data center. Now I could run a sync from here, but I don't have any virtual machines in this vCloud Director right now, so I'm going to work towards that. We're going to go back over to our environment here so we can see from our environment. There's some information here, but really what we're going to start looking at is our vCloud Director parameters, where we could start to see storage policies that may have been brought in. There weren't really, I don't really have a ton configured in my vCloud Director, but why don't we, I'm going to import parameters. Let's just see if anything else shows up in here. I don't think it will. Nope. So we're just going to kind of leave this to be the default action. Parameters, we can add other parameters as required. If we go over to groups, this is not available to any groups in CloudBolt yet, so I want to make sure that the correct groups are able to use this environment. OS builds, I want to make sure that we have OS builds available. Remember, we imported that CentOS 7 image, so that's tied to an OS build. And then finally, networks. We need to make sure that we're able to see the networks for this customer. There we go. There is the network. Let's now, from here, now that we have an environment available, we can go over to our catalog. From our catalog, I'm going to use my custom server blueprint, which is just the generic out-of-the-box blueprint for CloudBolt. You could also build your own blueprint from scratch and add a server tier to the build tab and work with it that way. So my sales group has access to this, but not IT, so I need to make sure that my blueprint and my environment match. And then what I can do is I can go over to my server. It's set to all capable, so I should see this as an environment selection. I could also configure an environment to ensure that it's available here as well. Now I'm going to go deploy this blueprint for IT, and there is my customer one VDC environment. Okay, so I'm going to give this a very generic name. You can set up host name templates. That's in CloudBolt documentation elsewhere. Not going to go into that. And you'll notice we didn't add the CPU and mem size parameter, but because they are required, they do show up here. So I'm just going to be very basic, maybe give it 2 and 4 for this virtual machine. There are no rates set for my vCloud Director resource handler, so I'm going to go ahead and submit and pause while this builds the virtual machine. All right, so we can see the virtual machine is now built. So there is now an existing VM in vCloud Director. We can see that one new virtual machine was built here. And forgive my VCD ignorance here. Let's see. Yeah, so here's my virtual machine. So we can see it was built with 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory. My template was 20 gigs. You can add additional disk parameters to this virtual machine. But now I have an existing virtual machine in vCloud Director. If I go back over to my order, I can click on my virtual machine from the order. And from here, I should see any day 2 actions that are exposed for vCloud Director. So let's just try a couple of these. First, let's go ahead and shut the machine down. Let's just check our job here. And there we go. We can see the virtual machine actually powering down at this point. So that should be shut down here in a second. Virtual machine's updated to partially running. And now my job has succeeded. I'm not entirely sure what the partially running has to do with anything, but the virtual machine is now in a partially running state. You'll see that the power shows off here, and if I go back over to my server in CloudBolt, it should show as powered off. There we go. It's now a powered off server. I'm going to go and power it back on. And back over to vCloud directory, you can see the resources powering on again. Back to some of the other things here with CloudBolt. Change resources. If I needed to go through and change the number of CPU, things along those lines. With vCloud Director, similar to vCenter, we'll also check to see if the CPU hot add is enabled for CPU. And if it's not, you have the option to change when this is going to execute. So you can also take day 2 action against this server to increase CPUs and memory. Other things, you can go through, add new hard disks, update the network if needed, those types of things. You can also write your own day 2 actions here as well. Now just checking on our power on action. Power on is complete. So my server is now powered back on. We're getting some good usable data from vCloud Director. I don't have an IP manager set up in there or even DHCP, so we're not getting the IP address back, but assuming those things are set up appropriately in your environment, you should see that information in here. So just, again, a very quick walkthrough of the vCloud Director resource handler. We covered off, first of all, enabling the resource handler, then connecting to vCloud Director, setting up an environment, adding it to a blueprint, and then deploying a server from CloudBolt. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any additional questions or feedback, please let us know. Thanks. This concludes another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around. And if you have any questions, if we can help with anything that you've seen here today, just to elaborate a little bit further, if you have any feedback for other ideas for the series, please reach out to your account executive. Thanks again, and happy cloud bolting.